Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Being the Change. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Keanu Rattray. We're with BeComs. Today, we've got another special guest with us. Senior homepage editor at Sky Sports. The founder of the sports media LGBTQ. Hopefully, I said that right. A general committee of the SJA, digital media editor. We have Jon Holmes with us. Jon, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. It's great to chat to you.
An honor to speak to you as well. How you been keeping in these times?
Yeah, things have been fine. It's been like a bit of a hard slog at times. I'm sure that's the same for most people, but I can't complain too much. We're just kind of cracking on with it, really.
So let's get straight into this. My first question is, obviously, you're here on Being the Change. What does being the change mean to you?
Well, I think, in the line of work that I'm in, it's a lot of kind of sports journalism that's based around storytelling. And really, I think what it means to me is a phrase that quite often we hear when we talk about LGBT representation, is that kind of, if you want to see the difference, you need to be the difference. And I think what that means to people is that sometimes, we each have an opportunity really to be a little bit more open about ourselves and try to, tell people about the merits of being authentic and what that actually means. So really, we can change the culture, we can change the environment around us sometimes just by being our authentic self and just being more open and trusting in the people around us. I think that's the way that you can actually really go a long way to making a difference in where you work, where you play, the sports you do, all those different parts of our lives that kind of connect with each other. So yeah, making the change is quite often just kind of being a little bit more open about who you are.
You're the founder of sports media LGBT+. What went into creating this?
Yeah, so we started off as a network group, and that's still kind of the mantra of the organization. We wanted to create an LGBT network that spoke to sports media particularly, and really that was galvanized a lot by the work that Leon and the BeComs team had done for Black and Asian and minority ethnic people in sports media. And we wanted to pick up the kind of LGBT part of that and try to take it forward. And really, in the 2.5 years that we've been going, we've also begun to take on more of an advocacy role and try to use our connections to have an influence across the whole of sport as well, and try and tell more stories from people across sport, whether that's grassroots or the elite level, about their journeys, about their experiences, whether they're LGBT people or people who are allies to those in the community. So there's been a lot of work that we've done just to try to kind of provide a bit of representation so that other people, whether they're in journalism or whether they're playing sport themselves, can just have that reassurance that they're not alone and that they're part of something that's much bigger.
And you've also done some work with the Premier League on the Rainbow Laces campaign as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my role at Sky Sports, part of that is helping to coordinate and provide content to support the Rainbow Laces campaign, which is run by the charity Stonewall. Through that, we've been able to kind of build loads of connections across sport in terms of just having that conversation about what it means to be LGBT and why that is at times relevant within a sporting context. Some of those conversations can be quite difficult, but in other ways it's really, really encouraging. And the Premier League have been, huge supporters of the campaign. And so we've been able to work with them very closely on trying to kind of tell stories within football. And there aren't that many at times, certainly within men's football. It's hard to find those stories, but we've been able to kind of use examples of people who are in the game, who are doing what they can to try to make the culture more welcoming.
Do you think the lack of stories has to do with maybe a level of comfortability in those players and wanting to be that voice for others?
Yeah, I think in men's football, particularly professional men's football, we're dealing with years and years of basically the whole topic being a taboo and not being spoken about for whatever reason. Maybe that's because it's such a traditional masculine activity, that whole element of not wanting to show any signs of weakness in order and it's a short career as well, and people don't necessarily want to have an outside, what they might see as an outside factor influencing their careers. So I think that's what we're dealing with, and we're now, moving at a a pace that's slightly out of step still with society. Society's moved on a lot in terms of LGBT rights, whether that's equal marriage or adoption and all the other parts of life that we know have really helped people be more comfortable. In men's football, I think there's always been a feeling of don't ask, don't tell. That phrase that you might have heard from other walks of life, and we're still trying to kind of deal with that and show people that actually, identity is not a weakness, it's a strength. And that's something that we're really trying to kind of share with people and make them understand that you don't have to hide who you are. And actually, if you're able to embrace that, then you're more likely to realize your full potential.
Now, definitely working on the Rainbow Laces campaign and, being the founder of Sports Media LGBT plus pieces of work that you're very proud of. Is there any other work that you've been proud enough to work on in your time?
Yeah, I think, the Sports Media LGBT, we haven't been going for very, very long. We're only up to like almost 3 years now, coming up to 3 years in the summer. And what we really wanted to do was try to find a slogan, try to find a campaign message that would kind of go beyond just sports media and would be able to be shared within sport itself. And that's what we've done with the Authentic Me message you can see behind me. And what we're trying to sort of share there is this idea that, okay, at times within sport, it doesn't really matter whether someone's gay or bi or straight or whatever, their sexuality is. That's obviously, it's not that important. But quite often for people who are part of the LGBT community, it can become a really difficult period when you're trying to battle with that internally. And perhaps you're kind of editing your language, you're changing your behavior, you don't trust people so much because you don't want them to judge you. So people get locked in their own head. And that's what we talk about when we say that people are in the closet and all the mental health problems that can be associated with that. Not every LGBT person goes through that, but a lot of people do, particularly when they're in a culture that doesn't really feel very welcoming and they're worried that they might be judged negatively because of that part of who they are. So what we're trying to do is try to encourage people to recognize that authenticity, that ability to be yourself and be more open with those around you actually can really help to boost your performance, because you're not having to worry about all that stuff at the back of your head that's kind of beginning to affect your performance and beginning to kind of weigh on your conscience. So we're trying to encourage people to talk more and just kind of free themselves up from a lot of those old habits of the past where people felt like they just couldn't talk about who they were.
Absolutely. What would you say so far on your journey through this in media has been an important takeaway that you've gained?
I think for me, I would really sort of recommend that people understand more about empathy, and that feeling of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and beyond just the LGBT inclusion work that I do. What I've been able to understand more is just about the wider sense of diversity and inclusion, and really kind of understand more about different people's experiences. We've tried to do a lot of this work at Sky Sports, and we've tried to really raise the profile of Black athletes and Asian athletes and athletes with disabilities, and everybody within kind of the wider sporting context is understanding a little bit more about what their experiences have been and why they've perhaps reacted in a certain way, or why they felt like sport hasn't been particularly embracing of them at times. Other times they've been able to use it to their advantage, and I think that's really inspirational for others to learn about. So really, I think empathy is such an important quality, and as journalists, we need to be able to kind of help people tell their stories, and we can't do that unless we're truly empathetic. So the more learning that we can do about everybody else is really important.
How important is it that a company like you working for Sky Sports, how important is it that a company like that is able to recognize that and put things in place to be able to make these changes and want to make create more inclusion and more diversity within media and within sport as well?
It's massive. I mean, I think we talk a lot about certainly the BeComs events that Leon's put on in the past, the D-word events, and all the work that the organisation does. We're talking about times when you're looking around your own newsroom or the people that you work with, and you might, well, you should be conscious of the fact that if that's not representative of society, if you haven't got enough women in the workplace, if you haven't got enough people of color who are working alongside you, if it's an environment where people feel like they can't talk about their partners or things outside of work that are important to them, then you're not creating a truly inclusive culture. So we need to recognize within our own newsrooms, first of all, where there might be problems and where people might not necessarily feel as comfortable as they should do. And then also, once you've got a representative newsroom, then you're much more capable of telling those stories from across sport that need to be told, and might not those kind of voices that might not otherwise be heard. So, for example, if you don't have a newsroom that appreciates the merit of the Paralympics, for example, if you've got nobody within that newsroom who's kind of passionate about para sport or understands the different kind of complexities that might approach a para athlete compared to an athlete who doesn't compete in para sport, then I think you're really not being true to your audience, and you need to be able to reach out and tell those stories. And actually, quite often, it's the people who are from those different parts of the diversity picture who are best placed to help to tell those stories or influence their newsroom and their editors to make sure those stories get onto the agenda.
John, we're going to end it here, but I need you to give me 3 keys. So 3 pieces of advice that you've picked up on your journey, or something that has stuck with you on your path that you can give to everybody watching.
Well, I would say it's really important that people work to try to take ownership of themselves. It's not really easy thing to do at times, particularly if your confidence might be low. But if you can find a way to liberate yourself from a lot of the hang-ups or that feeling of being concerned about what other people might think of you, rather than kind of taking ownership of it yourself, then that's something I would really encourage people to do. Either through talking more, sharing more, just trying to find those networks that are out there that, again, that allow you to flourish. I think that's a really important thing that I encourage people to do. I think we need to, let people find their voice. And as journalists, that's something that I would encourage them to do. I think, try and look for those stories that haven't already been told. And there doesn't have to be a high-profile person in sport. It could be somebody at more of a grassroots level, but they could have a really powerful story. And you're in a position where you're able to tell that. That's really crucial. And really just to kind of understand that, as you move on through your career, you're going to reach points where you're going to be in a position to lead. You're going to be in a position where you can kind of influence the direction, for example, that a news organization or a sports media publisher can go in. And you really have to seize those moments, I think, and understand where, you are responsible for taking the conversation into a new direction that might not have been explored before. And I just really encourage people to throw themselves into that opportunity, because they don't come around particularly very often, but when they do, that's when you can really feel like you can make a huge difference.
We appreciate your story and we appreciate your advice, John. You're definitely being the change that everybody needs to see and wants to see. Where can people find you?
Yes, so they can find me on social media. I'm JohnBoy79 on Twitter. That's probably where most of my energies are directed in terms of social, but Sports Media LGBT is across all the different social channels. We have our own website at sportsmedialgbt.com. It's not just for people who are LGBT. We're trying to encourage people who are allies to others in the community. If you've got a friend or family member who's LGBT, then absolutely have a look at what we're doing, understand a bit more about the events that will hopefully come back later in the year once the pandemic has lessened its impact. And we're trying to just create a community where people feel like they can be a part of that, whether they're in sports media or in sport more generally.
Well, John, thank you very much for taking the time with us.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and well done to you for everything you're doing on Be The Change. It's really, really great to see it happening.